Imagine waking up at 3 a.m. and discovering your room is no longer the same, that the walls have changed places, and something in the darkness is watching you from around the corner. Tonight, three people will share their experiences in the most haunted houses they've lived in, places where the impossible became everyday and where they decided to flee before it was too late. I'm your host for Untold Nightmares, and I'm warning you, after hearing these stories, you'll look at your own house differently. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready, because these are the most haunted houses, real testimonials. But before we begin, if you dare to make it to the end of this video, leave me a comment with the words, "I'm still here." I want to know how many of you are brave enough to listen to the full 3 stories. Welcome to Untold Nightmares, the place where nightmares have names and surnames. I'm your narrator, and every week I bring you horror stories you won't find anywhere else. Real experiences shared by people who've lived through the unexplainable. If this is your first time here, let me explain how it works. These aren't urban legends or made-up stories. They're accounts from real individuals who have agreed to share the scariest moments of their lives. I've changed their names and some specific details to protect their privacy, but the events are exactly as they remember them. Today we'll explore something we all take for granted, our home. That place where we're supposed to feel safe. But what happens when your refuge becomes your worst nightmare? When the walls that protect you start hiding dark secrets? If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell. And if you're really brave, share this video with someone who needs a good dose of fear. Now then, turn off the lights and let's begin. My name is Sarah, and for 6 months I lived in what everyone in town called the old house on Maple Street. It was 2019. I'd just finished college and needed a cheap place while I found a job. The rent was ridiculously low, but the landlord assured me it was only because it needed cosmetic renovations. I should have asked why it had been empty for 3 years. The first few days were normal. The house was large, too large for one person, with rooms I decided not to use. But on the third night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a sound I initially mistook for the wind. It was like a constant murmur, unintelligible voices that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. I convinced myself it was the old plumbing, the natural settling of a house built in 1904. The murmuring became a nightly routine. It always started at the same time, like a cursed clock. I tried recording the sound one night, but my phone only captured static. The strange thing was the sensation that accompanied those whispers. A cold that had nothing to do with the actual temperature of the house. A cold that seemed to emanate from within my own chest. The 4th week, the whispers became clearer. I still couldn't make out complete words, but there were patterns, as if multiple people were having conversations in an adjoining room. One night, I mustered up enough courage to investigate. I walked barefoot down the 2nd-floor hallway, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid July air. The whispers were coming from the room at the end of the hall, one I'd never opened. My hand trembled as I turned the handle. The door opened with a long, agonized screech. The room was empty, of course, just dust and moonlight filtering through the dirty windows. But the smell. God, the smell. It was musty, mixed with something sweet and sickly, like dead flowers. And the whispers stopped the exact instant I crossed the threshold. The silence was worse than the sounds. I stood there, paralyzed, feeling like something in that room was watching me from every dark corner. Then I saw the marks on the wooden floor, deep scratches, dozens of them, forming circular patterns around the center of the room. They weren't random. There was intent in them, desperation. I backed away slowly, not daring to turn my back on the room. When I finally closed the door, I heard something that even now makes me doubt my sanity. A soft, childlike laugh coming from the other side. Not a whisper, a crystal clear laugh. I didn't sleep that night, nor the next 5. A week later, my 70-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on my door with a pot of soup. "To make you feel at home," she said, but her eyes studied me with a mixture of pity and concern. Before leaving, she paused on the threshold. "Have you heard from them yet?" "The previous family. They had a little girl. She disappeared one night. They only found her shoes in that back room. I moved out 2 days later. I lost my deposit, but I didn't care. To this day, I can't sleep in complete silence, because now I know that silence isn't always empty. Sometimes silence is listening." My name is Marcus, and I've been a real estate agent for 15 years. I've been in hundreds of houses, from mansions to abandoned dumps. But only one made me swear I'd never step foot in it again, no matter the commission. It was a property on the outskirts of Portland, a Victorian that had been on the market for almost 2 years without a single serious buyer. The owner had died without heirs, and the bank hired me to sell it quickly. "We have to go down to the basement and take pictures," they told me. "Potential buyers want to see the entire space." Simple, I thought. I'd done it 1,000 times. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I arrived, around 3 p.m. There was plenty of daylight. The house smelled musty, like years of sealed windows, but nothing alarming. The basement had a solid wooden door in the kitchen, with an old padlock that the bank had provided me with the key. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended. I turned on my phone's flashlight because the light switch wasn't working. It only produced a faint electrical hum. The basement was larger than I expected, with low stone ceilings and the smell of damp earth. And there, leaning against the far wall, was a full-length mirror with an ornate frame that looked too elegant for that forgotten place. I began taking photos, methodically documenting the space. When I pointed the camera at the mirror, something on my phone screen stopped me. The reflection was off. I can't explain it any better. It wasn't an obvious change, but the reflected room seemed darker, deeper, as if the mirror were showing the basement as it had been decades ago. I approached, stupidly curious. My own reflection was staring back at me, but there was a barely perceptible delay in the movements. I raised my hand, and for a split second, my reflection didn't. Then it smiled. I wasn't smiling. I dropped my phone. The sound of plastic against the concrete echoed like a gunshot in that enclosed space. I bent down to pick it up with trembling hands, and when I checked the mirror again, everything seemed normal. But the temperature had dropped drastically. My breath was visible, and I felt goosebumps running down my arms. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, shuffling across the kitchen's hardwood floor. Someone had entered the house. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding pathetic and high-pitched. The footsteps stopped just above the basement door. I waited, holding my breath for what seemed like an eternity. Nothing.
No answer. I decided it was time to go and hurried up the stairs. But when I got to the top, the basement door was locked from the outside. I frantically turned the handle, banged on the wood, screamed. Absolute silence from the other side. Then I heard something behind me in the basement. Someone breathing in the darkness, close, too close. I didn't dare turn around. I banged on that door until my knuckles bled, until it finally gave way and let me out. I ran to my car without looking back. It wasn't until I got to the office that I realized I was still holding my phone. I flipped through the photos I'd taken, looking for evidence of what I had experienced. The last photo was of the mirror, and in the reflection, right behind where I was standing, was a figure. Blurry, but unmistakably human. Its hands were outstretched, as if it were about to touch me.
I'm Jennifer, and this is the story of why my husband and I sold our dream home after just 8 months. We'd been saving for years for this property. A split-level house in a quiet Connecticut neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a large yard, and a price that, honestly, seemed too good to be true. But the inspection showed nothing unusual, and the previous owners simply said they were moving for work. Everything seemed perfect until our 6-year-old son, Tommy, refused to sleep in his room. "The room moves," he said. "The walls move when I turn off the light." We attributed it to a child's imagination, to the anxiety of moving. We bought her a nightlight, left the door ajar, but the nightmares continued. She would wake up screaming, swearing she'd seen the sad lady standing in the corner of her room. On the 4th night of screaming, my husband, David, decided to sleep in Tommy's room to show him there was nothing to fear. At 4:47 a.m., he woke me up by violently shaking my shoulder. His face was pale and sweaty. "Pack our things," he whispered. "We're going to the hotel." It took me days to get him to tell me what he'd seen. He said he'd woken up feeling like he was being watched. The room was darker than it should have been, as if the walls were absorbing the light from the nightlight. And then he noticed the closet was on the wrong side of the room. Not similar, but exactly opposite to where it had been when he went to bed. I thought I was disoriented, but then I saw Tommy's dinosaur posters. They were upside down, like you'd see them in a mirror. And the door, Jenny, the door was where the window should be, and the window was where the door should be. I told him it was impossible. The rooms don't change configuration. But I returned alone during the day, while Tommy was at school and David was at work. With my phone, I took detailed photos of the room from every angle. I measured the walls, marked the position of the furniture. Then, that night, I checked again. Everything was exactly as it should have been. I felt relieved and a little embarrassed. But when I reviewed the photos on my phone, my stomach sank. In one of the photos, taken from the door toward the window, a reflection in the glass was clearly visible. Not my reflection. A woman with long, dark hair, dressed in white, staring directly into the camera. There was no mirror in the room that could have caused that reflection. I secretly hired a paranormal investigator, embarrassed but desperate. He arrived with equipment and spent 3 hours in the house. He found nothing conclusive, but before leaving, he asked me, "Do you know anything about the previous family?" I told him no. "You should investigate," he murmured. "That room,
has a very strong residual energy, as if something traumatic had happened there repeatedly. I did some research. The previous owners had a daughter. Her name was Emma. She was 7 years old. One night, she just wouldn't wake up. Sudden infant death, the doctor said, although it was unusual at that age. She died in that room, in what was now Tommy's room. That wasn't what made us sell. It was what I found in the attic a week later, searching for old boxes the previous owners had left. In the attic, amid the dust and cobwebs, was a child's diary. The last entry, written in a child's shaky handwriting, read, "The walls moved again last night. Mom says it's my imagination, but I know it's not. The sad lady is trying to get me into her room, and I think she'll succeed soon."
And so conclude tonight's 3 stories. Sarah and her night whispers. Marcus and the mirror that reflected more than just his image. Jennifer and the changing room, taking childhood nightmares to a whole new level. Maybe you're staring into the corners of your own room right now. Maybe you're wondering what secrets the house you live in holds. And that question, that little shiver that runs down your spine, that's exactly what makes these stories so disturbing. Because they didn't happen in movies or books. They happened to real people, just like you and me. Before you go, remember to leave me that comment with the words, "I'm still here." I want to know who had the courage to make it to the end. And if you have your own haunted house story, share it in the comments. Maybe your experience will be featured in an upcoming video. We'll be back next week with more testimonies that defy logical explanation. But for now, check that your door is closed. Make sure that shadow in the corner is just a shadow. And when you turn out the light tonight, remember that some houses are never really empty. I am your host at Untold Nightmares, and I wish you sweet nightmares.